We're going to do something kind of interesting today. We'll get to the divisional games in a second. But first, we want to take a look at the Cowboys, sort of where they've been, where they are, and where they're going in regards to Mike McCarthy and this head coach search. Before we do any of that, Jori, you tweeted out, as the show was about to come, you tweeted out the breaking news that they're going to be interviewing Robert Saleh. I want to get right to breaking news. We'll get to the past, present, future. But the breaking news of Robert Saleh here being interviewed, your reaction to that story that you've put out to the world that the Cowboys are talking to Saleh.
Yeah, I love that they're interviewing Robert Saleh. First of all, this is someone who is available right now. In fact, a little bit of like a nugget here. I was in Philadelphia this past week and Robert Saleh was in the press box and there was someone in the building who has interviewed for the Jets general manager job. And someone goes, "Oh, look, future Jets general manager talking to former Jets head coach." And I'm like, wait a minute, like, is this like a Mike Tannenbaum, Rex Ryan thing on the screen? And they're like, no, look, like Robert Saleh is here, because I actually hadn't realized that Robert Saleh spent the last few months as a Packers consultant. And so I don't know that he traveled to all of the games, but being that Philly's down the road from New Jersey, he did come to this past Packers-Eagles game. So the Cowboys, yes, I did confirm just before we went on air that the Cowboys plan to interview Robert Saleh for their head coach opening. And I think that it's a great move because this is someone who he has head coaching experience, which is important to Jerry Jones. He has defensive coordinator experience with the San Francisco 49ers, who for a lot of years really were the big problem for the Cowboys making any push in the playoffs. The 49ers were just thwarting them every year, and it wasn't just on 49ers offense. And I think that when we get to our list later in the show of what we want for the team, you'll see how much I care about accountability and a toughness that I think will balance out the Cowboys culture that is in place. And Robert Saleh can do that. So I think it's a great move. I think it's a great conversation for them to have. I'm skeptical whether Jerry Jones will hire someone whom he has so little familiarity with, but I would be glad to be proven wrong because I do think that Robert Saleh has a lot to offer the Cowboys. My biggest question would be, who is he bringing in an offensive coordinator? Because the number one thing, and again, spoiler alert, because we're going to get to that segment, they need to have a plan for Dak Prescott with the money they're paying him. And so I need to know who Robert Saleh is going to have running the offense, given that I don't think of his Jets tenure as a tenure in which he just crushed the offensive coordinator hires.
I do find it so funny that the whole league knows that the Jets are so bad that it's just like, yeah, Robert Saleh is going to be interviewed for head coaching jobs because he couldn't have won there because Ambassador Johnson is so terrible at running his team. And I like Saleh. I think Saleh is going to be really good in his second job. I think that, like you said, the players really react to him. He's a good defensive mind. I think he just was in an unwinnable situation because the Jets are the Jets. So I like the Cowboys interviewing him. I think it would be a good hire. I don't think you're going to do it necessarily, but of all the things that Jerry Jones, the boxes we think he wants to check, I think Robert Saleh might be the best candidate. I actually think Mike McCarthy is the best candidate of all, but that's not going to happen, obviously. So who has head coaching experience? Who can help with the culture? Who can raise this team's floor a little bit? And I think that it comes back to Robert Saleh is a really good option for that. I think that he's better than a Kellen Moore, who's never been a head coach, who would have to deal with the madness that is the Cowboys' job. He's not Doug Peterson, who has just failed now, at the end of the Philly tenure and in Jacksonville. And he's not Pete Carroll, who I hate to say he's 73. Like that's hard to turn your team over to Pete Carroll. How long is he going to coach? So I think Saleh would be a great hire. I really do. I think he could handle Dallas because he's handled the Jets. So why not?
Right.
And I think he's just a good coach who, again, when your owner is Ambassador Johnson, you're just going to be in an unwinnable situation. And I think the whole league realizes that.
Well, are we really calling him in? Wait, Sure. Are we
that's
really
what he
calling
wants to
him
be called.
That's what he wants to be called. I want to be called King
Fitz.
Jason for the rest. I'm not. He's way closer to being Woody from Toy Story.
King Jason than Johnson, Ambassador Johnson.
I mean,
look, if it is a former president, fine. Former president, fine, maybe. No, we are not doing it.
Currying favor at the Jets here.
Also, it's not just that he's no longer ambassador. It's also the fact that people in the Jets organization are required to call him Ambassador Johnson. That makes him be like, I am not calling this man Ambassador Johnson.
I do think
but you
that's
make
the
a great point,
the
Frank,
Jets,
though,
yes.
Going back to Woody Johnson, you make a great point that someone who has worked for Woody Johnson can work for Jerry Jones. And if anything, for all the people who are like, oh, Jerry Jones, like you don't want to work for him, Jerry's a way better person to work for than Woody Johnson. He's way more loyal. He's way more supportive. And while he may create some distractions, he will also support you and try and give you a structure within to work. And he's not letting a 13-year-old run the organization.
Yeah, he's not doing this on Madden ratings. That's automatically a step up for Robert Saleh if he goes from the Jets to the Cowboys.
But here's the funny thing. If I'm Robert Saleh, yes, everything you just said makes a ton of sense. If I'm Robert Saleh, God, I would love to just have one that's easy, though. Like, I understand that the Cowboys are a job with cachet. And I believe that they're the best available job. I think that there's no better current opening than the Dallas Cowboys because I do believe they have a quarterback. They've got superstars in positions where you can win. They got to nail some drafts and they got to get some things going. But let's face it, they won 12 games 3 years in a row for a reason. This is a team that can win. So I think it's a great opening. If I'm Robert Saleh, though, I just like, man, I'd like one job where it's just sort of normal, one job where I have the autonomy to be just a head football coach and not also, some sort of a circus show. So
Ringleader,
I don't know, but I do think you guys both make good points on why this is a quality, at least a quality interview. And considering how tough we've been, rightfully so, on the Patriots for their just gross circumvention of the Rooney Rule, I also like the fact that when we see qualified candidates getting interviewed, that means something to me. I just, in general, some of these sham interviews, and I don't care if we're talking about Rooney Rule interviews or non-Rooney Rule, it is like you just see some of these interviews and you roll your eyes. At least Robert Saleh, I think, has something to offer to the interview process. Not that I think Jori would listen.
The other thing that I think we should keep in mind is when you look at what the Cowboys did with Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn, they brought in Dan Quinn, who had been a former head coach, who wanted to get back into coaching and wanted to be a coach, but he wasn't having the head coach opportunity yet. So they brought him in as defensive coordinator. I think we could absolutely see something similar with Robert Saleh if his interview goes well. Robert Saleh is not a lock to get a head coaching opportunity in this cycle. And let's say you bring in a Kellen Moore type, and we'll get to Kellen's candidacy later in the show, and you say, well, we have this offensive mind. We have this guy with the familiarity with the Cowboys organization, but the same way that Minnesota has Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores kind of balancing each other out in terms of fire and ice. Well, Robert Saleh can bring some of that fire that maybe a Kellen Moore type head coach would not. On top of that, if you're Robert Saleh and you're trying to get a job, well, if you have Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Trayvon Diggs might be injured, Deron Bland, if you have the talent that the Cowboys have on defense, if you have proof that multiple coordinators recently have had the Cowboys defense playing at a high level, and last I checked, Dan Quinn, former head coach, did well with the Cowboys defense with the talent he was coming into, got another head coaching job. If I'm Robert Saleh and I want to do that, the Cowboys are a super high profile team with which he should be able to succeed. So I'm not saying he shouldn't be their head coach, but if I'm the Cowboys, I'm bringing him in and I'm like, great, if we will go with him as head coach, fine. But also we should try and put the sell on him to be our defensive coordinator because there are so many things that both sides could offer each other.
I like that a lot. I mean, if they were able to pull that off with Robert Saleh running the defense, a head coach would be fine too. But I think the one thing we know about Robert Saleh for sure is he can coach defense. I don't think any of us would question that. So, and whoever, like, let's say, like in this situation, Robert Saleh is your defense coordinator. He could be a help to a head coach like a Kellen Moore who's never been a head coach. Here's my experience. Here's how to handle this. And so I would like that a lot. Yes, I think Robert Saleh is going to be an asset for somebody wherever he lands. And I think the Cowboys would be smart to land him in whatever capacity they can. So
now let's get into the past, present, and future. Let's go full Christmas Story. Don't at me. The best is the Mickey Mouse Disney Christmas Story because they get the whole story told in 30 minutes. I don't need a 2-hour version of it. So we're going to get the entire story of McCarthy and the Cowboys told here. And let's start with the past. McCarthy and the Cowboys together. So you've got this divorce that's happened where they thought about staying together, but now they're not staying together. And it raises a real question of what the future, what we can take from that for the future. Like, Frank, when I say Mike McCarthy, do you think differently of McCarthy now based on what did or didn't happen for the Cowboys?
Not really. I think that he's a good quality coach. I don't know, I don't know that he's necessarily the guy who you want to go win a Super Bowl, but he could. He's won a Super Bowl, so maybe. But I just think when you look at his record, he is a guy who has put up really, really good records over and over. And no, he's only won the one Super Bowl. Since when is that a bad thing, right? A lot of guys out there have never won a Super Bowl. But I just think that he's a guy who needs better PR. Like, everybody just wants to assume that Mike McCarthy is some bumbling idiot when he's not. He's a very good football coach, as he said right at the end of the year. And I thought it was really telling. He's like, I don't know where this thing is going with Dallas, but I'm a winner. I've won a Super Bowl in this building. Like, I thought that was, I like that from Mike McCarthy. A little bit of swagger from him of like, hey, yeah, everybody wants to dunk on me for winning 12 games and a playoff game and losing to 49ers in a divisional round. But hey, like, I'm a pretty good football coach. He has a better record than a lot of Hall of Famers out there. Go look that up. So I don't think any differently of Mike McCarthy. And as I've said, like, we kind of talked about this on Monday, I think the best coach that Jerry Jones could hire right now, based on all of his criteria, is Mike McCarthy.
He's no longer a coach Jerry can hire, though.
I know, like, it's just like, how do you screw this up if you're Dallas? I still think he's the best guy for that job. And I think Mike McCarthy, wherever he goes next, the Bears or the Saints, I think it's a pretty good hire. I really do.
I mean, I think, first of all, it's worth noting that when McCarthy was giving that answer about I'm a winner, it was in response to someone asking about his contract being up. But I think that when you look at this and how we got here, you say, okay, the Cowboys came out of the 2023 season, 3 straight 12-win seasons, 3 straight playoff berths after having every other year success in the Jason Garrett era. And they had an embarrassing home loss to the Green Bay Packers. I mean, again, I was tweeting about it this past week when I was at the Eagles-Packers game, and it's like going into like 2 minutes, 1 minute and 50 seconds to be exact, before halftime. Last year, the Cowboys were down 27-0 at home, and the Eagles were up something like 17-0 this year. So there was a big difference, and it really should not have happened, and I think was also a little bit reflective of the fact that Mike McCarthy had come from Green Bay. Fast forward to this year and you say, okay, going into this year, the big reason that Mike McCarthy was on an expiring contract is because Jerry said, I didn't hire a coach to win games in the regular season. Jason Garrett could do that. I hired a coach to take us deep into the playoffs, to take us to the NFC Championship game, the Super Bowl. They have not even been to an NFC Championship game, much less won one or won a Super Bowl in 30 years now, the 1995 season. I mean, this is a long drought. Again, I was 18 months old when that happened, so you guys can feel old for that.
Yes,
but growing up in Dallas, I mean, like, my brother and I, who are 18 months apart, like, my dad was holding him in the hospital watching this. So I think that this is really why they hired a guy like Mike, and that didn't happen. So when Jerry said going into the final week of the season that the hay is in the barn, he wasn't saying that, oh, in this season, he said, I have 5 years of information. So then you fast forward to their negotiations. And I've talked to multiple people in the organization, as well as people in other organizations who have been in contact with people in the Cowboys. And the way they paint this picture is, you can say that Jerry's cheap, and I know, Frank, on Monday when we had this conversation, you did. But really, most of all, Jerry is old school and believes that he doesn't want to pay for something he's not getting. So he wants to pay for production. So if you told Jerry, hey, everyone else is making $12 million, if he could say, Mike McCarthy, I'll pay you $5 million for the year, but if you win a Super Bowl, I will pay you $20 million more. If you go to the NFC Championship game, I will pay you $10 million more. Jerry would be excited about that. But that's not how this works, in the same way that he brought Dak down to the final wire. I mean, literally the day of the opener. He brought CD down to the wire. Ezekiel Elliott, all these deals got done at the last minute because Jerry's like, why am I guaranteeing them this money with the structure that I don't believe in? With Mike McCarthy, he did not philosophically believe that he should give a guy a 5-year contract for, say, $10, $12 million a year when he had not done something like that in the last 5 years to give, like, in the last 5 years, he did not reach the number one benchmark. And so then you say, well, what's Mike McCarthy going to do? I think the reason that I do believe Mike McCarthy will be a head coach in 2025 is because Mike McCarthy, first of all, has a great resume. He has a lot of interpersonal skills and a lot of schematic skills and play calling skills that I think that can be really valuable to an organization. But where I think he probably is at this stage in his career is he is someone who could take an organization that is spinning, whether that's because of their talent that they have, whether that's because of the ownership structure they have, and he can stabilize it, and he can get them to win, and he can get them to beat divisional opponents, and he can get them to make it to the playoffs. I don't think currently he is going to get them over the hump to the Super Bowl, which, by the way, yes, he did a fantastic job in the playoffs in Green Bay, but he also had Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And so I think an organization like Chicago or New Orleans will be better in the short, medium, and long term if they hire Mike McCarthy. But where the Cowboys are now, they need someone who is going to get Dak to the next level, and Mike McCarthy did not do that in 5 years.
One real quick thing on Jerry, and we talked about this a little bit on Monday, but I want to revisit it just a little bit. You talked about him being old school, not wanting to pay and all this. I get that. I do. But at some point, doesn't Jerry Jones look in the mirror and say, okay, the one constant for the Dallas Cowboys the last 29 years when we haven't made the NFC Championship game is me. why am I doing the same thing over and over? If you are a quote unquote Hall of Fame owner, insert my own eye roll here, don't you have to adapt? Or you just say, you know what, this hasn't worked for 29 years, but your 30 is going to be different. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. Like, no, you adapt, you adjust, you say, you know what, I'm not spending all the billions I have before I die. Let's be honest. Like, I need to do something different. And I just, it blows me away that this would be like some like, yeah, I don't want to pay Deion Sanders buyout. Like, I'm not even saying Deion would be a good coach, but
is one of the top reasons I do not believe the Cowboys are going to hire Deion Sanders. They're not going to hire Bill Belichick because they're not paying North Carolina $10 million, and they're not going to pay the Colorado buyout. I firmly believe that it was a brilliant piece of marketing, which is one of Jerry Jones' best things. The people in the organization are like,
100%.
Well,
marketing.
everyone's bashing us because it took us 8 days to fire our coach after the season. What if we just tell them we're talking to Deion? Then we completely change the narrative, and hey, worked brilliantly.
But don't you agree? Don't you agree with me at all, Jori? That I get this is his. These are, and we've talked about these are the guys he's going to interview because this is what he's done in the past, and this is what he's not going to do because he's never paid a buyout. Don't you think after 29 years you say, well, you know what, I might not be as great as this as my gold jacket would lead me to believe.
The thing is, you can say that, but the man's 82 years old. He's not changing his ways. And I'm not saying that his current philosophy is most likely to win the Cowboys a Super Bowl. I'm saying that as we try and understand how the Cowboys got here, where they are, and what they're about to do, that is the framework in which they're going to operate.
Let me just say this. When's the last time any of us sat at Thanksgiving or Christmas with your family and had your 82-year-old family member say something that made you think, wow, they've really rethought everything about the way they live their lives and do what they do.
All right, fair.
That's not going to happen. Number two, I just want to throw two little numbers at you. Okay, the two little numbers that keep sticking out to me: 58% and 10-9. Okay, what is that? That is Andy Reid's winning percentage with the Philadelphia Eagles and his playoff record: 58%, 10-9. At this point today, where we stand with Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's playoff record is 11-11. It was 10-9. Remember, for Andy Reid before he got a quarterback that everybody knows is incredible. And 58 winning percentage for Andy Reid. All right, we're at almost 61 winning percentage for Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's not just a good hire for the Bears or the Saints or any of these teams. He's an epic hire. He's a home run hire. If I tell you, you can get somebody that has a Super Bowl, that has been coach of the year, that has a 60% winning percentage, that also has a 500 record in the playoffs, you can get that person. Like, we could sit here all day long and talk about where the Cowboys failed in the playoffs. But quick question here, Saints, Bears, any bad team that's looking at a coach right now, how often are you making the playoffs? Like, maybe you need somebody that can win a bunch of games to get you into the relevant conversation, which Mike McCarthy can do. I feel like the Cowboys, well, we sit here all the time and we talk about how the Cowboys are the best thing in the world because it helps your brand. Does it? I guess my question is, are you held to such an asinine expectation when you're the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys that it actually hurts your brand coming out of it? Because everybody's like, oh, didn't win enough games. My God, he's won 61% of his games and he's got a 500 playoff record. And we're talking about him like he's, I don't know, Dennis Allen at this point. He's not.
And here's the thing. It's not just a Cowboys thing, Fitz, because this goes back to his Packers days. Jori even mentioned, he only won one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. Well, do we hold it against John Harbaugh that he has one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and he's never even been to a Super Bowl with him yet? Do we hold it against Sean Payton that he only won one Super Bowl? Drew Brees? No, like all these conversations are so Mike McCarthy centric. That team, that 2010 Packers team, set a record for most players on injured reserve for a Super Bowl champion. Mike McCarthy led that team to a Super Bowl. Yes, he had a great quarterback. You know who's also had a lot of great quarterbacks who won Super Bowls? A lot of these great coaches, Andy Reid and Bill Walsh and on. Like most Super Bowl winning coaches have had a great quarterback. And there's guys, Peyton Manning, like no coach won more than one Super Bowl with him. Like it's just this McCarthy thing where somehow, somewhere along the line, he just got this reputation as this just dolt. Like he's just a terror. Like you said, he's Dennis Allen. He's Nathaniel Hackett. This guy has won more games percentage-wise than Chuck Noll in his career. Like, it's weird that Mike McCarthy's the one guy who's won a Super Bowl. We all say, that didn't count. He won it with Aaron Rodgers.
I really feel like you were singing a different tune a couple months ago, Frank, in terms of the Cowboys keeping Mike McCarthy. I feel like you were ready to move on.
No, yes, I was, because I do
think that we have to remember, look, I completely agree with you, and I'd like to take back my words about he's only won one Super Bowl, because in fairness, he didn't just make it to the playoffs. He made it to the playoffs like 8 or 9 times in Green Bay. Bay and made it to the NFC Championship repeatedly, which again, the Cowboys have not done in 30 years. I think what is notable though is that you guys know that I was like on one and continue to be on one about the Patriots getting rid of Gerard Mayo in 1 year, generally after just 1 year, and also because of the way they brought him in and like got him in the building. What I think is interesting is Mike McCarthy had 5 years. That's very, very reasonable. We're talking about it like Jori got rid of him after 1 or 2 years. Like he had that 2020 season where things went really poorly. And let me tell you, that was not a good situation for Mike McCarthy. I was there. I was covering it. Mike McCarthy will tell you there was a really big adjustment for him, in part also because he showed up during COVID and couldn't establish the culture in the way he wanted. But he had 5 years. And so I think that to say like, oh, all of a sudden Cooper Rush was winning some games. Yeah, totally agree. High floor with Mike McCarthy. But after 5 years, when the ceiling was not getting any higher, you got to get a new voice in the building.
Yeah, it's one of those like, and I thought this back then, and I still do in some ways of like, if you're not going where you need to go, you need to change things up. Like the Vikings were Kirk Cousins. I always kept saying like, well, you're not winning a Super Bowl with him, so what's the point? And so in that part, yes, but I do think Mike McCarthy is a good coach. And I guess it leads to another, like, what should the expectation be of a coach in 5 years? If you're telling me right now, any hire, Mike Vrabel with the Patriots, let's say, if I say over the next 5 years, you're going to win 12 games 3 times, you're going to lose to one of the best teams in football twice in the playoffs, and you're going to lose to another really, really good team a third time, you're going to go 1-3 in the playoffs. Is that reasonable? I would say yes. I would say, like, okay, honestly, that's pretty good. You didn't win a Super Bowl, but not many teams are winning Super Bowls in the Patrick Mahomes era. Like, that's just not happening. Mike McCarthy lost twice to the 49ers and once to the Packers. Like, it happens.
I think it's different for the New England Patriots and the Dallas Cowboys, and I think it's reasonable to say in 5 years, you need to make it to one NFC Championship game if you have this talent. If you're going to win 12 games 3 times, yes, there's variability, but you got to do it once.
But what about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers then? Like, I cannot believe that people want to get rid of Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, and they'll use his playoff record over the course of the last however many years as part of that conversation. All he ever does is win enough games to put them in the middle, and they can never be great. Like, isn't that the same thing we're saying about the Cowboys here? Like, you're winning a bunch of games, but you're not winning Super Bowls. Like, that's the line where we suddenly decide that you make a change ahead? Look, I've been consistent on that.
If your goal is to win a Super Bowl and after 5 years, something like that's not working, you haven't done it. Again, Mike Tomlin has done it, so you know he can do it. Then I think that at some point you have to say a fresh voice.
I think you have to have context to that goal. All right, we need to keep moving, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll take a look at the present, the Cowboys search as it stands right now, and we'll also take a look at the future. What should the expectations be? We'll answer that question after a quick break.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, so let's get into the Cowboys coaching search. We already talked a little about Robert Saleh. Jori, I think your explanation on Deion was a beautiful one. Let me just ask this. Does anybody on this show believe that Deion Sanders will be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
No.
No, right? But I always say, well, it's Jori, so anything's possible.
When was the last time Jori did the Jori things that you think he was going to do?
I know, but
This is not 1990s Jori.
I think it's a very small percentage. Let's put it that way. Very, very small percentage.
I think it's a brilliant play by both sides. Deion will get more money from somebody somewhere that's worried about Deion moving out of Colorado. I don't know where they'll find the money. And to your point,
there's going to be a Colorado booster who throws money at Deion.
It's me. I'll do that.
And he's going to go recruit and be like, I stayed and didn't go to the Cowboys to be with you guys.
It's all publicity. Yeah. When you put Jerry Jones and Deion Sanders together, publicity comes to mind, yes.
I watch Get Up every morning while I'm doing my morning fasted walk, and all they talked about this morning for the second straight day is damn Deion and Jerry Jones together. So yeah, it's working. So none of us believe Deion. We all believe that Robert Saleh is.
Let's not pretend that Yahoo also doesn't want us to just talk about this.
Yes, no,
that's 100%.
I'm getting electrical shocks right now. We're going to not talk about Deion going to the Cowboys. Yes.
Yeah, I know. I got shocked when I said no, he's not going to be there.
It's full transparency. I'm the first to admit this. The last year in the fall, when we were doing our reaction videos to college football that I'm a part of, we figured out quickly that every time we even said Colorado in any of our recaps, the numbers were big. So yeah, I started putting Colorado in. Like, we're all sitting here trying to make sure that we get content clicks. Like, I just think, let's be real and transparent with people about that. Get up just a little bit more heavy-handed on 2 straight hours of live TV about it. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so we all agree that Robert Saleh was a good interview. What else, Jori? Who else is out there that you think is reasonable right now as we look at the coaching search? What's next? Where are they on it?
Yeah, among the people I expect the Cowboys to talk to is, I would say, Anthony Lynn is really interesting because he's someone who has familiarity with the Cowboys. He spent a couple years there, and even though it was only a couple years, it was actually a really emotional time for him because he was the victim of a hit and run accident there. And so he had to go through some really serious medical situations that the Cowboys and the Jones family were very supportive of. And so I remember talking to him before one of the Cowboys Chargers game when Anthony Lynn was the head coach there. And he talked about that connection. And so I would think that that's someone who, look, he developed Justin Herbert. He was the coach when Justin Herbert was in the building. And that was something that, hey, I went to Washington last year, and Anthony Lynn is currently on the Washington Commanders staff. And the day I was in Washington during minicamp or during OTAs, Dan Quinn had come up to Anthony Lynn in the hallway and said, hey, the one thing I've done, like, Dan Quinn had done so many things. He'd taken a team to the Super Bowl as head coach. He'd figured out the defense. He'd figured out how to manage a team as a whole. But he had not developed a young quarterback because he had Russell Wilson in Seattle, and then he had Matt Ryan in Atlanta, and then he had Dak Prescott at quarterback. With the Cow. He had Dak Prescott in Dallas. So the one thing is they had to figure out what to do with Jaden Daniels. Now, Cliff obviously had experience, but Dan was trying to think more of like the big picture strategy as opposed to the scheme. So he told Anthony Lynn, I want you to think about this. I don't want you to answer me now. And tomorrow, let's meet about this. And you tell me what worked for Justin Herbert, what didn't, and let's apply this to Jaden Daniels. So Anthony Lynn has been a part of the process. Like, look, I am not trying to take credit away from Cliff Kingsbury, but I think there are 2 other people in the Washington building who have been factors in what the Commanders have done with Jaden Daniels. And I think both of them will be on the Cowboys call list. They'll have to decide whether they want to interview, and they'll also have to wait until after this week to do that. But I would say the first is Anthony Lynn, and the second one is Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, I've heard from multiple people, has been a factor in terms of Jaden Daniels' development. He was the Eagles offensive coordinator last year. That did not go well, but also a lot of things didn't go well for the Eagles last year. And I think part of that's a Super Bowl hangover. But what's interesting is that when we think about the Cowboys, and I talked about this Monday, Jerry wants some degree of familiarity. That could be with the Cowboys. It also, because maximizing Dak is so important, could be with Dak. Well, Brian Johnson coached Dak at Mississippi State, and they have stayed very close since. I mean, they'll still grab dinner when they're in town, things like that. They're in touch. So he is someone who has seen Dak. And also, when you think about it, like, I've talked to people in the organization who believe, and you can say what you want about Dak's age and his health, that he does need to run a little bit more the way that Jalen Hurts does. Obviously, not with the exact same element for the Cowboys to maximize their offensive scheme. Well, when did he most do that? In college at Mississippi State. Who was the coach in the building then? Brian Johnson. So going back to this candidacy, I would say Brian Johnson. I would say Anthony Lynn. I would say Robert Saleh. And the other one is, well, 2 more. Jason Witten. He is part of this conversation. Whether he would be head coach or not is interesting.
That's legit.
He is part of this conversation. I am telling you, I've talked to people in the building and they're like, oh, but, and then Kellen Moore. And so let me just talk about Kellen Moore for a minute. Kellen Moore is someone who, whether you talk to the Chargers, the Eagles, the Cowboys, or even, because Kellen Moore has interviewed for a lot of head coach and offensive coordinator jobs in recent years, I've kind of been talking to people who interviewed him, around the league has a lot of respect in terms of his personability and in terms of how he calls plays and schemes things up creatively. The number one question about Kellen Moore is he going to be the presence, the leader of men that you want? Because what's interesting is we're in a time in the league where we are increasingly moving towards that, whether it's D'Amico Ryans, whether it's Dan Campbell. I mean, Dan Campbell is a walk-around head coach. He is not the coordinator, but look how influential it's been. I mean, even Mike Tomlin in some ways. It's not that these guys don't have schematic elements, but they have that strength. And there's really not another coach in the league that we could think of. I've asked multiple people from multiple teams about this who have the presence that Kellen Moore has as a head coach. So then you say, well, there's some interest from some people in the Cowboys building of like, well, what if you get Kellen Moore and Jason Witten together, and Jason Witten can kind of be your rah-rah guy and Kellen Moore's your schematic guy? But that gets complicated because you're not going to bring Kellen in as OC below Witten. He's already an OC somewhere else. But I do think that that will be interesting because what's fascinating to me about Kellen Moore is that if the Cowboys hire Kellen Moore as their head coach, fans will have Sean Payton to thank for that. Let me explain. Jerry Jones is someone who does not like someone to get away. He wants to be the guy who be like, I found the coach and I raised him and he had success and we won a Super Bowl together. Because then it could be Jori and the coach as opposed to the coach winning it. Ever since Sean Payton left the Cowboys as their coach, became the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, and won a Super Bowl, he has been the one that got away for Jerry Jones. This is not just about what he's done. It's really, that's why Sean Payton was linked to the Cowboys for so long. But again, we've talked about what Jerry does and doesn't want to give up, so he wasn't realistic. Jerry wanted that. He didn't like that Sean came up through him, came up with Parcells in the Cowboys, and got away. Well, when you look at Kellen Moore, he's one who got away. He has had success elsewhere. He hasn't had Sean Payton's success, but Jerry really didn't want him to get away. And that was why he kept Jason Garrett for so long, because he wanted to be the guy who raised Jason Garrett. And it was why when Mike McCarthy got in the building, and Mike McCarthy is a much better head coach when he calls plays psychologically and in terms of the value he brings, Jerry said, no, you got to keep Kellen. And it wasn't because he didn't trust Mike to call the plays. It was because he didn't want to lose Kellen to another team. And so I think there is still that element of Jerry that says the same way DQ just got away, the same way Dan Quinn is having the success for the Commanders. And if I had just done this a year ago, maybe I could be having that. I can't let Kellen have that success elsewhere.
Interesting. Can I ask you something real quick? Not talking about specific names, but generally, what do you think Jerry Jones's top priority is? Is it you've been a head coach before? Is it offense versus defense? Is it leader of men? Is it schematics? What do you think is on the top of Jerry Jones' list aside from I don't want to spend any money on a buyout?
Maximizing Dak Prescott, familiarity with being a leader, whether that's head coach or coordinator, and with the Cowboys. There has to be some degree of comfort. Again, this is why in the league's diversity programs, they keep trying to get minority candidates around team owners, because team owners hire people they are comfortable with. And then I would say someone who is comfortable embracing the culture that Jerry has built, because that is something that Jerry is going to talk on radio twice a week, and he's going to talk while the head coach is talking after games. You just got to deal with that. He's also going to kind of be like grandpa coming in to like help things out and smooth things over and advocate for the grandkids sometimes. And a coach has to deal with that. So I think all of those things are important for Jerry. And I mean, we'll get into the future section with our wish list, but I think that all of those are going to be relevant to my wish list.
Let's go there now. I mean, as we go from where they are to the future, what should be on the wish list? Like, and really, guys, our goal here is to look at the Cowboys from two different angles. Sort of what Frank just said. You know, what is Jerry thinking? But also, like, if we were in that building, what would we want Jerry to be thinking? I think there's a little bit of a combination here. So, you know, Jori, when you say you've got sort of a wish list, what is it?
Yeah. Okay. I'll go 5 to 1. I mean, my top 5 wish list for the Cowboys. Number 5, I want someone who has schematic wrinkles that will be different in the playoffs and elevate it, because I think that winning in the playoffs is not just about the leader of men, although it's really important. I think that it is really important to have a different type of style and a different type of fight that you can elevate in the playoffs, because if you're the best team on a given day, well, this is not 4 out of 7 like the NBA. This is one game. There is variability. You have to have something you can pull out, and I don't think Mike McCarthy had that. Number 4, I talked about this with Minnesota, but there's this like fire and ice thing that you need if you're coaching. So if you bring Kellen Moore in, I need a defensive coordinator to have that fire. The way that Minnesota has had success is because Kevin O'Connell is not your fire guy. He has a little bit, but that's not his main strength. But he has someone like Brian Flores in the building, and they balance each other out. So I need there to be some sort of passion, fire going after that. And if it's not the head coach, I want it to be a coordinator. Number 3, I need someone to interrupt the complacency with the Dallas Cowboys. I think it's easy to get complacent. We were coming into this gorgeous facility that is the Star, when Jerry's going on and making all this money, when everyone wants to be, hey, you're the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm not blaming any individual player. It's the culture they've built. I've talked about this at length, but you need someone to say, who cares? Who gives a you-know-what? You haven't done anything. You haven't won something real in 30 years. And that's what we need to come to work with every single day. Which leads into my number 2, which is accountability. This was not an accountable team this year. I'm not saying no player was accountable, and I'm not saying no coach was. But Ezekiel Elliott was showing up for meetings repeatedly. He even didn't go to one Atlanta trip because they didn't let him go because he had been late so many times. And respectfully, Jerry Jones was like, oh, Zeke, no, I love Zeke. Oh, Zeke, he could still play. It doesn't matter if he came to meetings. It doesn't matter that he now wants to go play for the Chargers when the season's over. I'll release him a week early. No, there has to be standards. And if you treat anyone differently, everyone else notices this. I talked about this, and this is interesting with Robert Saleh. When he wasn't holding Zach Wilson accountable 1 week last year, I was like, everyone else in the locker room says, hey, if you're not putting any accountability on Zach, not all, but any, people recognize that. The problem is that this is going to be in conflict with Jori's goal, which I firmly believe is the goal of respecting the culture Jori built, because Jori's culture of like, the Cowboys are great and you should revere the Cowboys brand is in conflict with the accountability and interrupting the complacency. And then you get to criteria number 1 for me, which is maximizing Dak Prescott. When you look around the best NFC teams, maximizing the quarterback does not mean getting someone with Trevor Lawrence's arm or even Aaron Rodgers' arm lately and having them just blow it up. When you look at Detroit, when you look at Philadelphia, when you look at San Francisco, these are teams that invest in their offensive line and protection schemes, invest in the weapons, invest in the run game, and try and help the quarterback by the quarterback managing a complicated system that involves a lot more than the quarterback themselves. Jared Goff is one of the best quarterbacks statistically in the league because of all the things around him. And that's not a knock on Jared Goff. That is probably how you can best play football this year in this era, because I believe, because there's just so much power and so much talent on the defensive side that if you have one guy, that being the quarterback, who is the strength, you're not going to be able to eliminate all the options. And so that's why I keep saying Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach with the Lions, because I think the best way to maximize Dak Prescott is to strengthen the offensive line and to have Dak and the running back play off each other. And then, oh, by the way, you'll have Micah Parsons in the defense getting you takeaways. So that's my wish list for the Cowboys.
I agree with everything. The things I get tripped up on are 2 and 3, and I think they're related. The accountability and shaking up the complacency. And I just don't think Jori has it in him to hire, like he hired Bill Parcells back in the day. Bill Parcells wasn't going to be Jerry Jones' yes man. Like, he's Bill Parcells. I don't think he'll ever make a hire like that. So I think about like Bill Belichick, and we talked about the buyout. That's not going to happen. I get it. But even just philosophically, I don't think Jerry Jones would ever hire a Bill Belichick, because Belichick would not come in and be like, yeah, I'll keep Zeke Elliott around because you really think he's a cool guy and you're going to be on radio every single day this week. Like, Bill Belichick would be like, no, that's not how it's going to operate around here. And that's what Jerry needs. And that's not what Jerry's going to hire. Like, it's just like, it's going to be the same old thing, no matter who he hires, whether it's Kellen Moore or Saleh. It's going to be somebody who is familiar, as you've said many times. And I think it's very well put. Somebody who's familiar with the culture Jerry Jones has built, and somebody who's not going to shake it up, to be honest. I don't think Jerry's at a point where he wants to be shaken out of his complacency. That's why he hasn't changed his ways in 29 years when they haven't won anything. And I think that's the tripping point for me, is when we think about the present and what you want out of this Cowboys coach, what they're actually going to get. I think 2 and 3, like you might get a Kellen Moore who gets a lot out of Dak Prescott. You might get all these schematic things that you like. But the one thing you're not going to get that I think you really need is somebody to come in and say, Jerry, no, you ain't doing radio today. You aren't talking to 50 reporters outside the locker room after the game. Like, we're changing the culture around here, and you need to listen to me because you haven't won anything since 1995. And that's just not going to happen. It just, that's so unreal. Deion being hired is more realistic than that.
So, Frank, I 90% agree with you, and I think you're right, and I think you have a good pulse on Jori that he is not going to give up his power. I think there are different ways that you can manage the Jori situation and kind of like laugh and be like, that's him, and here's where we are as a football team. There's one candidate out there that I think has a chance of shaking this up because they're already too late on the Mike Vrabel boat. They literally fired or parted ways with Mike McCarthy after Mike Vrabel was introduced as the Patriots head coach. But the one person I would say they have a chance with is Detroit Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, and here's why. Mm-hmm. Aaron Glenn played for the Cowboys in 2005 and 2006. That might sound like a short stint to you, but what's interesting is, first of all, he's been around the Cowboys and been around Jori, which means something to Jori, whether you think it should or not. And secondly, he was around the Cowboys during the Bill Parcells era. He played for Bill Parcells. And so I did talk to someone in the organization who, when I said, hey, Aaron Glenn, he's got these Texas connections, he's got this Cowboys stint, they said that the best way to convince Jerry Jones to bring this guy in would be like, Bill Parcells endorsed him as being on his team with you, and that will speak to Jori, because Jori likes to say he's the decision maker, but he factors in a lot of opinions, and Bill Parcells is someone with whom he holds in high regard. So I think that it seems like the Saints and Jets probably have a leg up on getting Aaron Glenn, and I can see why Aaron Glenn might want that. Although I will say, I believe the Cowboys have a more talented roster than either of those. The Jets, if you get a quarterback, maybe they can compete. But I do think that that is the one chance the Cowboys have. And I think if they can get Aaron Glenn, that would be a fantastic hire. My only question is who are you bringing as offensive coordinator, which, in case you haven't heard me say it 700 times, Hank Fraley.
Okay, so let me just add one portion to all of this, because for your list, Jori, you left off one thing that I think is wildly important, but I think would actually answer everything you just mentioned. I think you absolutely, if you're the Dallas Cowboys, have to hire somebody that has been a head coach in the NFL before. I don't think you can give this to a first-time person because of all of the elements you just mentioned. You talk about distractions. Nothing's normal about this job, right? So a first-time head coach that's stepping in where nothing is normal about a job now has to figure out how to manage Jori, how to manage the Cowboys, how to manage the circus show that we've talked about, how to manage superstar players that know that they have the autonomy to do kind of whatever they want, whenever they want, how to manage the fact that you've got a big name quarterback and a big name wide receiver and a superstar on the defensive side of the ball that have not all only just got, they're not all just getting paid. They also have a huge voice in the locker room. I don't know how, if you're a first-time head coach, you can come in and worry about all the things that come with being a first-time head coach and manage those variables. That's why, particularly, I'll go back to Jack Del Rio, who I worked with at ESPN years ago. And when I talked to Jack about the difference the second time he was the head coach, he said, man, the most important thing I knew going in the second time was I knew what mattered and what didn't matter. I knew what to worry about and what not to worry about. And you think about, that's just a normal head coaching job. You do that to the Cowboys, man, what to worry about, what not to worry about is its own spreadsheet of pros and cons, right? So I think the most important thing when you look at their future, Jori, in order to handle Jori and to handle the atmosphere and to bring in accountability and all these things, it has to be somebody that has a cemented legacy already as a head coach that can walk in the door and say, hey, I know what I'm doing. And you can do your radio hits all day long. I'm not going to listen to them. You need, essentially, while they're not going to get Mike Tomlin, you need a Mike Tomlin type. You need somebody that's going to come in and doesn't care what anyone's going to ask him, not going to give anybody any leeway. He's going to do his thing his way, and that's the only way it can work. I fear for a Kellen Moore or an Aaron Glenn, who I think can be good coaches. To me, you want to talk about the future, I'm looking for Brian Flores, somebody who, frankly, may not get a shot somewhere else. So he's going to have to deal with a little bit more of the BS coming around it, but also is a guy that understands what it means to be a head coach. I'm looking at Cliff Kingsbury, who, you could take away from a division rival and bring in somebody that does work with quarterbacks, but also understands, hey, I've done this before. So I get this whole thing. And Cliff Kingsbury certainly does not shy away from the limelight doing the draft in his own home, right? So I look at all of this. I think you got to have somebody that's comfortable with, I want to be a rock star, but I also want to understand that in this band, I'm never the lead singer. That's always going to be Jerry Jones. But I'm also going to have to be so confident in what I do. I'm going to have so much proof of concept in what I do that the locker room has to listen to me. Jerry has to listen to me. Dak has to listen to me. And I know how to shut out the noise. I don't think a first-time head coach can do that.
So here's what I would say. I think, first of all, Cliff Kingsbury is interesting for some reasons, but the reality is if you're trying to maximize Dak, the system that Cliff Kingsbury has had success with does not ideally play to Dak's skill set.
Fair.
Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels, just different quarterbacks than Dak. Cliff could be a good head coach again, but it should be with that type of quarterback because that's what he's going to be able to maximize. Secondly, when you get to Kellen Moore, Kellen would have no issues with Jerry. I don't care that he's a first-time head coach. He might have issues in front of the team. And I say that respectfully just because I remember I once had a conversation with Dak Prescott and I said, Dak, you guys love Kellen. Teams are coming to me asking me, should we interview Kellen for our openings? And I say, I don't know, because Kellen won't show me why you guys love him so much. And Dak goes, that's what we love about him. I don't want him to show you that, which was fine and dandy until you're the head coach and you have to have some sort of outward-facing personality. What I will say, though, is while Kellen won't give you a lot, and Jason Garrett kind of got into that robotic mode, and he's different on TV now than he was when he was the head coach of the Cowboys, Kellen could handle Jerry no problem because nothing phases Kellen Moore. And he comes in and as being in Dallas as opposed to somewhere else. Kellen Moore in Dallas, from the time that Dak Prescott got in the league, he goes from Dak Prescott's backup quarterback. Really, he was actually ahead of Dak on the depth chart, if we're being technical, when he got in. And then he got hurt, broke his ankle during training camp. Backup quarterback to quarterback's coach to offensive coordinator. And for a lot of years, they had the number one offense. He has the skins on the wall. He has the production and he has the respect in that building. But that's not going to be the problem. The question is just who's going to be the raw guy. What I will say, though, I think would be really interesting for Aaron Glenn is, in my ideal world, you bring in Aaron Glenn and you bring in Jason Witten together. And Jason Witten can have that influence of hey, here's how it works with the Cowboys. You were here for 2 years as a player. I was here for 1 billion years and even came back and unretired after Monday Night Football. So I was basically hybrid player coach in terms of the leadership role I had. I can tell you what you need to worry about. I can smooth things over with Jerry. I've got Jerry's ear. You go worry about that. And then ideally you have a defensive coordinator, whether it's Mike Zimmer, Robert Saleh, or someone else who's been a head coach before. And then you have a defensive coordinator who's been head coach before, a Jason Witten who understands the dynamics backwards and forwards, and Aaron Glenn who can be that leader of men. Also worth noting, Aaron Glenn and Jason Witten were teammates for 2 years on the Cowboys and understood the Parcells way together. So if you want to say, let's get Jori on board with this Bill Parcells buy-in, well, you have two guys who showed that together and they understood together what works for that. And wow, I hadn't thought of that until we got on the show. And now I want to go bring it straight to the Cowboys front office.
It's a beautiful thought. The only thing that sticks in my mind, talking to somebody that was around a former head coach in the NFL, said the first year that they were there, all the things that they worried about, like down to the type of toilet paper that was in the bathroom. Like coaches at sometimes their first time coaches don't understand, hey, whether the lunch menu is right or not right is not my concern today. And a lot of first time coaches just don't get that. That's the other minutia I'm talking. Like, it's already such a damn full-time job dealing with Jori. It's a full-time job being a head coach. It's a full-time job trying to figure out how to navigate the tours coming through the Cowboys facility while you're practicing. It's all of these are full-time jobs. I would trust somebody that's had these jobs before over a newbie. We'll see. The one thing we know is it's not gonna fix itself in the next few weeks. So we'll keep breaking it down. But going to take a quick break, and then we're going to break down the AFC divisional games. They're right around the corner. We'll tell you what we think is going to happen. We'll do that next. Okay, Frank, we got games to preview. You and I will be reacting to them Sunday night, obviously. Let's start with the AFC. We'll do the NFC on Friday. The AFC game's coming up. Houston at Kansas City. Is there a reason in your mind that we're not just going to move Kansas City through to the next round?
Not really, except there's one. There's one way the Texans can win this game, and it is exploiting the Chiefs' issues at offensive tackle. And I know that calmed down a little bit when Joe Thuney moved out there to left tackle from guard, but that's not his natural position. DJ Humphries came back last week. There's a reason he was unsigned most of the year. He didn't look great in Week 18. He looked okay at times, but had some bad reps. I think that if Will Anderson, Daniel Hunter can get that going in the pass rush and really fluster the Chiefs offense, there's your path. Like that is the one mismatch that I see the Chiefs having in this game. Otherwise, yeah, the Chiefs, unbelievable to say this, probably moving on to their 7th straight AFC championship game, which is just unbelievable.
When you say it like that, Jori, I mean, my God.
You know, by the way,
remember 30 years without a conference championship, 7 years with only a conference championship.
Do you know who the starting quarterbacks were at the last AFC championship game before Mahomes took over? It was Tom Brady and Blake Bortles. Those were the two quarterbacks in the last AFC championship game that did not feature Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs.
God, I love that. That's a perfect nugget. Jori, you agree Kansas City rolls in this one? Feel good about the Chiefs?
I think Kansas City rolls, but I will say the same way that the Texans surprised us last week, and I thought the Chargers were going to beat the Texans. I think that they'll make it a competitive game. I think that Houston showed us they have a little bit more than we thought, and Kansas City has shown us that even if they're going to win, they're going to do it I keep forgetting my metaphors. They're going to do it very narrowly. And so I think that this will come down to the end, but ultimately Kansas City will win.
Yeah, two things we know. Kansas City games end up being closer than we think a lot, and they never lose close games. So they'll win. But let's get to the game of the millennium, the one that everybody's got their eye on, the MVP matchup of a lifetime. Josh Allen versus Lamar Jackson, Baltimore, Buffalo. The Ravens favored by 1 at this point. So, Frank, what do you got? Baltimore, Buffalo, how's it going to play out?
I was actually very surprised the Ravens became the favorite because I thought, people would be like, oh, Josh Allen at home and this and that. But I think people are onto this Ravens team, that this is a really, really, really good football team. And we might have just been sleeping on them as the best team in football for the past 2 months. Like, this is a team that I don't know how you stop them on offense. Like, again, it's Lamar. It's not just Lamar as a quarterback. It's Lamar as a dual threat quarterback. If you stop one facet of Lamar's game, he's just going to beat you in the other facet. And then, there's this 247-pound back that he's going to hand the ball to 25 times. We saw this matchup happen once, and I get it. It was a million years ago. Week 4 seems like lifetimes ago, right? But what we saw in that game was that the Buffalo Bills could not stop Derrick Henry. The Ravens absolutely dominated that game, 35-10. The only time the Bills lost by more than 7 points all year. And it just sticks in my head that what's really going to change in the rematch? I don't think the Bills are that much better than they were in week 4. And I think this Ravens team is better because the defense is so much better. They flustered Josh Allen in that game. I think that, similarly, they're going to do that in this game. Their defense is playing at a top 5 level now somehow after some early season struggles. Zach Orr, by the way, future NFL head coach, he did a great job as our coordinator in the second half of this season. I just like the Ravens. I just think they're going to win. I get Josh Allen, Superman. He's awesome. He could carry this team to a victory, but I just think the Ravens are more well-balanced. And they might have been in plain sight the best team in the NFL the last 6 to 8 weeks, and we really haven't talked enough about that.
Well, I think the reason we didn't talk about them is the same reason we weren't talking about the Los Angeles Rams, which is that these two teams started out struggling. I mean, again, this is a Ravens team that lost to the Las Vegas Raiders early in the season. But I think that, to me, what worked so well in New England all the years they had their dynasty was not that they won every game of the season. It was that they lost games early in the season. They figured out very acutely where their strengths were, where their weaknesses were. They built on that, and then they were in postseason form by November, December, and they continue that into January and February. That's what we're seeing from the Rams, and that's what we're seeing from the Ravens right now. We're seeing it in very different ways in terms of the quarterback play and the scheme, but in terms of the trajectory of their seasons, it's very similar. I think with the Ravens, again, they had a new defensive coordinator. They had a lot of pieces they had to figure out, but they ultimately got there. They figured out how to maximize Lamar and Derrick Henry in that offense. And I think for Buffalo, yes, they might be better now than they were at the beginning of the year, but I don't think that Buffalo defense will be able to stop Lamar and Derrick Henry and co. in the same way that I now trust, although I wouldn't have a few months ago, the Baltimore defense to be able to at least slow down or contain somewhat Josh Allen and his team. And so I think when you look at it, it is so funny though, because on paper, this should be like a 42-41 games, kind of like what we saw with the Bills and the Rams a couple weeks ago. But every time I say that, I feel like it ends up being a low scoring game. And so it'll be interesting, but I do think the Ravens will come out ahead.
And one thing, real quick before you go, Fitz, that we've talked about months and months, and I think it's come to fruition. Not everything we talk about in May it becomes true, but I think this has become true. Why is Lamar Jackson lost in the playoffs? I think a big part of that is he's just pressing because the whole Ravens franchise is on his shoulders. We saw the body language and he made some mistakes against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game last year. We also talked a lot about how they only handed the ball off to running back 6 times in that game. They put everything on Lamar Jackson's shoulders. When you get Derrick Henry, the day they signed him, they were thinking about a game like this where, okay, we're going to hand the ball off to that guy 30 times if we have to. He's probably going to run for like 150 yards, and Lamar Jackson's not going to feel like the weight of the world's on his shoulders. I think that's the biggest difference. In everybody talks about, Lamar's never made a Super Bowl. Lamar's never made a Super Bowl. Yeah, he's never had a Derrick Henry to hand the ball off to and take some pressure off of him. I think that's a massive difference in this Ravens team and the other ones.
That's why
I feel
this
like
game.
I now have to make the cheesy line of the reason Lamar was able to slim down this year is because he doesn't have so much weight riding on his shoulders.
Oh boy!
Oh, look at
be here all week.
Look. This game isn't Lamar versus Josh. This game is Cook versus Henry. And especially when you start talking about Sunday night, the temperature, the high at that time is supposed to be about 20 degrees. The wind chill could keep it into single digits while they're playing a football game. You want to tackle Derrick Henry over and over and over again in single digit, could be snow weather. I don't. I just think that this is such a Derrick Henry pounds it out, and the first half is just back and forth and back and forth. And the second half, some of those runs get a little bit longer and everybody gets a little bit more tired of tackling him. He breaks one loose. It feels like it stacks up for a Ravens win. And it's not, as much as we'll make it part of the candidacy conversation of whoever wins the MVP. I don't think it's about the quarterbacks. I think it's about everybody but the quarterbacks in these games. So this one, to me, Baltimore wins. And you're right, King Henry in this process. I will say, Frank, early in the year, I was loud that I thought that the Ravens and the Eagles by the end of the year would have the 2 most unstoppable offenses. I stand by that at this point. The Lions take nothing away from them, but 2 offenses that can beat you a million different ways, that the Ravens will be on display. We'll break down the NFC on Friday with C-Rob. We'll probably argue about random things that don't matter too, because that's what happens there. But in the meantime, be sure you're following Jori on social media as she is doing a bang-up job covering everything going on with the Cowboys. Look, we gave America, Yahoo, and everybody else what they wanted, a bunch of Cowboys content. We're happy. Stone doing God's work as always. In fact, Stone's probably wearing a Cowboys shirt, Cowboys jersey, Cowboys hat now, just because, all Cowboys all the time. Subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, do all that stuff. It helps us out a lot. Tell your friends, your family, your enemies. Tell everybody to hang out. In the meantime, we'll see you on Friday. Thanks for listening to Inside Coverage.